Hello, everybody. My name is Christopher Walls. I'm with NetGain, and we're just going to wait here for another minute or two, let another few people come in, and then we'll get started here. But thank you for coming today. All right, as we hit 1 o'clock here, we'll go ahead and well, 1 o'clock Eastern. Not for sure where you are, but we'll go ahead and get started. So just to remind everybody what we're here for today, this is going to be a about 1 hour long webinar with NetGain Technologies, who is myself and Braxton Bolton, and also Arctic Wolf, which is represented by John Watson. We'll take a look at what all we do exactly here in just a minute, but we'll be looking at a look back toward what the year of 2022 was like in terms of cybersecurity attacks, how damaging they were, how often they occurred, and just some kind of broad statistics around that. And then we'll take a look at how a pretty tried and true mode of attack has changed over the recent months and years, and how people like John and Braxton are changing to meet those evolutions. So let me just, looks like we've got a good number of people here. So, and there will also be, I should let you know, there'll also be a few polls as we work through today's webinar, just some ways for you to, think about what's coming up. And there'll also be a Q&A session at the end where you can ask anything. You can also ask your questions ahead of time. If you look on your GoToWebinar panel, you should see a little drop down that says questions. You can type your questions in there and we will get to those at the end. There's also a chat function. We have somebody watching the chat. So if you have any questions around what you're seeing in the actual presentation, or how to ask a question, how to interact with the poll, something like that, you can ask us there and we can help you out. But with that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So like I said, just a quick look at what we're going to do today. We're to take a look back at 2022 and what happened in the cybersecurity world, specifically types of attacks, how often they occurred, and just really how prolific cyber events were in 2022. And then a look at how one particular mode called phishing, we'll get into what that is later if you don't already know, how that's changing and how we can change to meet it. So first off, I'll introduce myself. I am not one of today's cybersecurity experts, but I do work with NetGain Technologies. My name is Christopher Walls. I'm a content marketing manager, and I help find people like John and Braxton here who are certainly cybersecurity experts to speak on topics like this. So John, if you want to introduce yourself a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So my name is John Watson. I'm a solutions engineer here at Arctic Wolf, and I come from a background with many years of experience in the Security Operations Center, analyzing alerts from different telemetry sources within different organizations. But I've also provided expertise to ensure organizations are focusing on their security journey. Currently, I map solutions to small and medium-sized businesses to ensure Arctic Wolf is the best fit to reducing their cyber risk. I'm excited to be here to talk about the following items and with Braxton.
Yeah, thanks, John. My name is Braxton Moulton. I'm the Technical Director of Security here at NetGain Technologies. My primary role and function is to work with our clients across many different verticals as a virtual Chief Security Officer. And that's working mainly to help them improve their cybersecurity posture, whether it be for regulation requirements or just in general helping to improve them protecting their data as well as their customers' data. So we do provide, or I assist with providing different types of services such as vulnerability assessments and cybersecurity awareness and training. But my primary goal is, of course, just working to help guide them to improve that posture. So I'm excited to be here.
Great, thanks, guys. So moving on to our first topic, a look back at 2022, and we're going to use this as a way to judge where we're coming from and look at how dangerous, in a way, the whole year of 2022 was in terms of cybersecurity. But before that, I do have our first question to get us thinking here. How often do you think a ransomware attack occurs? So you should see a poll coming up on your screen in just a second. You should see that now. So for those that may not be aware, ransomware in brief, I'm sure Braxton and John could define this more in detail, but in brief, it is a piece of malicious software that takes over either a computer or a whole network of computers and holds either the network or data within it, quite literally ransom, where the cyber criminal is asking typically for money, a direct payment of money to release the data back to you, or to not release it onto nefarious, dark web sites. So I'm just going to let this run for another couple seconds here. Looks like we're pretty evenly split between 7 and 11 seconds. That's interesting. So it seems like we think that these happen quite frequently. Well, you're probably not wrong. I'm gonna go ahead and close this out. We did have 36% said 7 seconds, 45 said 11 seconds. So let's see where this takes us. And John, if you want to take some of this research that you are providing and dig into it, and we'll see exactly how bad 2022 was.
Awesome, for sure. So over the last 10 years, the cyber landscape has really changed, but we want to take the time to review what's been happening in the last year. So in the last year, this is probably not new news to you, but cybercrime is currently an industry. It's not one actor, it's a business accomplishing ways to compromise you to gain money and be profitable and that kind of thing. So with that being said, malicious actors have one target, and that's to compromise you. And it's not currently like whether or not it's going to happen. It's going to happen, but the question is, when is that going to happen, and how resilient are you to that cyber risk? So currently, it's a $1.5 trillion industry for cybercrime, and looking at that, it's currently has larger gains in the world than the biggest companies. Currently, cyber risk is the second most concerning risk in global commerce for cybercrime. And then back to the poll, every 11 seconds is when an attack is executed. So during the time of this webinar, roughly 327 victims will be of ransomware. So let's rally together and reduce your cyber risk.
So there's lots of good takeaways just from this one slide here. But one thing that I want to focus on is that this makes money. It's a business. That's why it's thriving. That's why it's growing. I know we've got some call outs here for some like big organizations like Walmart, for example, but we primarily operate out of the small to medium sized business space, and this is frequent in that space as well. So, I don't want you to get the idea that, okay, they're looking for, major payoffs. They're looking for a lot of money here. They're obviously going to go after these corporations that can pay them, millions, billions of dollars. That's not the case. You're going to be a target as well, because, you could be lacking resources to defend yourself, or you could be a stepping stone for, that attacker or that hacker or even that group to then go into one of those bigger enterprises and organizations. So as long as they can get paid, they're going to come after you. So I don't want you to think that you're safe.
Thanks, Rex and John. Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I'm taking away from this is just the frequency of attacks. Every 11 seconds is incredibly quick. That doesn't mean that all of these are necessarily successful attacks, but I think just the pure volume that is out there that's hitting your networks or potentially hitting your networks is pretty staggering. So we're going to move on here and take a look specifically at how these attacks broke down, what they were trying to achieve in our next slide. And if you want to go ahead, John, and take some of this.
Awesome, yeah. So in regards to what Braxton was saying is attacks on small organizations, we're seeing it time and time again. It's easier to do and it's typically more profitable. There's a AI function currently that's called ChatGPT. You probably have heard of it, but it's allowing script kiddies, which are people that are usually not well versed in a specific language in regards to scripting, but it's allowing them to create malicious scripts and attack current vulnerabilities that are currently available using a simple AI technology as ChatGPT. We'll lead into that a little bit later in regards to phishing. But going back to some statistics in regards to 2022 is about 73% of users currently duplicate their password both in the personal aspect and work accounts. And that's coming back to, hey, if they're using it both for personal and work accounts, that's going to come back to the organization to affect them negatively. For example, business email compromise, that reuse of passwords when those passwords are released on the dark web, they now have that. So in regards to business email compromise, currently about 80% of organizations don't have multi-factor authentication configured, which is one of the steps to prevent business email compromise from happening. Along with that is about 81% of people currently see vulnerabilities and misconfigurations the biggest weakness in their environment. And that's where NetGain and Arctic Wolf can help you find those misconfigurations, find those vulnerabilities, and mitigate both of them.
So John, you've got some really good empirical evidence here, but let me supplement that with anecdotal evidence or my own personal experiences. We've got called out here on the left side of the screen what types of attacks we're seeing. Ransomware, we've already gone into detail a little bit about that, but also funds transfer fraud. And I've personally dealt and worked with some organizations that have been impacted by one, ransomware, but also funds transfer fraud. And the biggest vehicle for those types of attacks to have come through has been through email. So I know that we're also calling out, a business email compromise as a separate attack here, but don't get it mistaken. That can also be the vehicle for which that these other types of attacks are occurring. And it can be someone compromising the account, logging into someone's email and either, completely making up an email thread or just simply kind of latching on to an already ongoing email thread and, putting forward like a request for like a wire transfer or something, and that going to the appropriate audience that can approve that type of thing. And before you know it, it's approved and you've lost that money and sent it somewhere where you don't want it to go. So again, because we operate in this space, this can affect you, and I've seen it personally.
Thanks, guys. So, yeah, I think you mentioned a few days ago when we were talking, Braxton, about how certain levels of a business tend to be targeted for things like funds transfer fraud. Is that where you're seeing more of your C-suite, your CFOs, your CEOs be directly targeted for this, where instead of just the whole business being targeted as a broader attack campaign? And I
Sure.
guess the idea there is so they can get a hold of that CEO or that CFO, right?
Right. So, when you think about like a funds transfer fraud, like typically, who's going to have, the ability to like approve, where the funds go for an organization? It's going to be someone, in that executive level or that C-suite. So yes.
Right. That makes sense. Well, we'll move on here and take a look at some of the overall trends based on industries. Some of these industries may be ones that your organization falls into, or maybe you fall somewhere between these bars on the graph. But John can start us with a walkthrough here of exactly how certain industries were targeted more so than others.
Yeah, perfect. So in regards to the top 10 industries, now just because your industry may not be on this list, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not being targeted. So in regards to the 10 top industries being targeted currently, you'll see healthcare is on the list, but legal, financial, and construction are there as well. It doesn't stop there. Sensitive information and critical assets is what these malicious actors are after. They're going after sensitive data. They're going after your critical assets. They want to take your organization down potentially and make money off of you as well. So looking at 2022, about 58% of data breaches were targeting specific personal data. So social security numbers, date of birth, names and addresses to continue down that attack vector, right? So looking at another piece in regards to what's been happening in the last year is most attacks are involved with a human element. So about 95% of all breaches are from a human element, which is in regards to either misconfigurations, phishing emails, potentially weak passwords. There's a lot of human elements out there that reside to potentially a breach. And then the last fact I want to just bring out is roughly 4 in 5 breaches can attribute to an organized crime. So the majority of breaches that are happening currently are coming from an organized cyber criminal.
Right. So we've talked about email already, quite a bit already, email compromises, and that's only going to increase and become more prevalent. And the reason why that's such an issue is because that's directly attacking the end user, or again, that human element like John was referring to. So, think of it like this way, if I have, 27 locks on my door, all you have to do is just knock on it and convince me, who you are. You could say, hey, I'm your mom, let me in. And it doesn't matter how many locks are on the door. I'm going to unlock them all and let you in. And then I'm going to find out that you're not my mom, right? So social engineering and tricking the end user is one of the easiest ways to kind of bypass, actual technical security controls that you might have. And again, the email is one of the biggest vehicles for that. But another thing to kind of point out here is 80% of incidents were driven by unpatched vulnerabilities or remote access tools. Again, and I'm sure John sees this as well, zero-day vulnerabilities, which are vulnerabilities that either the vendor themselves are not aware of existing or they just simply haven't been disclosed, are a huge issue. And we saw a number of those over the last year in 2022. And in a lot of cases for these zero-day vulnerabilities, there's no patch. There's nothing out there because, again, the vendor or that provider was not aware that it existed. So when things like that happen, it's hugely important that we're approaching, our risk management for our organization through like a multi-layered approach or a multi-layered defense. Or defense in depth. That might have been another way that you've heard that thrown around. So one of the ways that we try to, address unpatched vulnerabilities or remote access tools is with like a vulnerability scanning tool that can actually, look at the weakness of your asset and help you to address, the risk exposure for your organization, or with like proper network segmentation or the like. So all these things have to work together to try and help combat these rising trends that we're seeing.
They're great points there. So I think what kind of strikes me from this is that 80% of incidents were from unpatched vulnerabilities. To me, and again, I'm not the one holding all the cyber security certifications here, but that sounds to me like, honestly, it's kind of easy to remediate, right? This doesn't sound like something that requires someone like you, Braxton, or John sitting behind a cascading matrix code, right, to fix this stuff. And I think that kind of low skill floor is what's hitting me with some of this. It's not necessarily difficult to address this. But it's it has ramifications, huge ramifications, clearly, if you will.
Yeah. So interesting point there, Chris. No, it's not difficult to say run a vulnerability scanner. But what you have to do is, when we're talking about risk management and having like a risk management program, vulnerability scanning and vulnerability management is a part of that. So actually, conducting the scans on a routine basis, and then finding what was found from those scans and then, executing remediation, that can be, where it can be a little bit difficult. So like getting an expert in your corner can be beneficial for that. But in terms of, what's one of the easiest ways to help address this, certainly getting vulnerability scanning going and then looking at your vulnerability management program in your organization is one of the best ways to handle that. Absolutely.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think we'll get a bit more into vulnerability scanning and just a framework that you can follow if you are hit with something like this, your incident response plan. We'll touch on those a bit more in our section looking at best practices of how to actually address some of this. But I think we'll move on to our next slide. And it's actually going to be our next session, our next section of the webinar, where we're going to talk about how a fairly common mode of attack, phishing, has changed over the past few months or years to really evolve into something pretty new and different. But before that, I will ask our second question here. Do you know a victim of phishing? And this could be in your professional life. It could be in your personal life, a family member or friend. And you should be seeing this poll on your screen now. And for those who may not be familiar with the term phishing, it's a fairly broad term, and John and Braxton will get into some of its definition here in just a minute. But essentially, these are your email scams. These are, well, they're not always just email now, but typically they're your email scams where they're trying to get you to click a malicious link or give them some sort of piece of information that you probably shouldn't be giving somebody. So I'll let this run for just another couple of seconds here. Wow, this is a resounding yes. 89% currently say yes. Nobody has admitted to it being them. I was curious if anybody would do that. And the fact is maybe it has been you and you don't necessarily know. That's certainly on the table as well. But looks like most folks have responded. So I'm gonna go ahead and close this poll for now. 86% of everybody here has said yes, they know somebody in their life who has been a victim of phishing. That is outstanding to me. So we'll move on here and take a look at it. And John, if you could maybe define, exactly what a phishing email is, probably better than I can, and also some of these sort of variations or spin-offs of phishing, spear phishing, smishing. What are some of these attacks?
Yeah, for sure. So sometimes these specific target words can be confusing, right? So email phishing is your normal phishing target that's going to be targeting everyone. So it's going to say, hey, here's a gift card. Please click on the following link to access your funds. So then maybe if you click on that link, it'll provide you a portal to log in. And essentially what they're looking for is your username and password right there, right? Spear phishing, they're specifically targeting executives in a company, like Braxton had mentioned a little bit earlier, which corresponds to funds transferred, potentially fraud. And so that's where that spear phishing comes into play. Vishing and smishing is all based on your telephone, right? So vishing is making calls. They're going to call you and say, hey, this is what's going on, please help. Or you'll see a text message come in with a link, and if you click on that link, it'll bring you to another site, and they're going to be trying to capture your data that way. And then clone phishing is going to be like a clone of an email. So I know personally I've seen these emails in my personal inbox where it's like Amazon saying, hey, we saw that there was a suspicious login in your account, and then they'll say like, click here. But in reality, that's not Amazon emailing me. That's someone, a malicious actor, emailing me, trying to get my credentials. So going back to the poll, where it was like 84% of you guys said you've known someone to have phishing or be affected by phishing. Arctic Wolf in 2022 actually saw that 90% of incidents were targeted by an employee attack. So like phishing, spear phishing, phishing, smishing, clone phishing. That's where we've seen 90% of incidents.
Yeah, so Chris, I know you said that was outstanding, that you saw like 86% of people that knew a victim of a phishing attack, and really that,
Perhaps shocking was a better word.
right,
Maybe shocking. Yeah.
right. So, from what John and I have seen, that's not a surprising figure at all. In fact, I felt that was a little bit low. So these kind of, these different types of phishing attacks that we're talking about here, like clone phishing, where, an email, poses itself as someone like from an authoritative, like space, whether it's like the CEO or the president of a company, that's, where you see things like funds transfer fraud, again, trying to pose as someone who has the authority to, request like a wire transfer or something like that. And then, if you do get an email that, is like, hey, you want an Amazon gift card, like, whether or not you sign up for a contest, right? Like, you're not going to just get a random email that says, hey, you won for something you didn't even sign up for or you weren't aware of. We all want that to be true, but that's not always the case. And these types of different types of attacks is, attackers getting creative and how they're also being so successful with this specific form of social engineering. So again, not really surprising to myself, and it's only just going to get worse.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So one thing that I'm taking from this definition of phishing is that phishing itself is not a type of hack, I guess we should say. It's not it's not ransomware. It's not necessarily funds transfer fraud, but it's the vehicle by which almost any of these could be delivered. Would you say that's correct?
So there's like a romanticized idea of like hackers, where anyone who's doing that is going to be, typing like 1,000 characters, per second on their keyboard, and there's going to be like, green matrix text on their screen. That's not always the case. It's more likely that, someone trying to, get access to an organization's data, or again, get some sort of payout, or, affect your productivity for like a ransom, something like that. They're going to try the easiest ways first, which is almost always going to be like social engineering. Because again, it doesn't matter what type of technical controls you have. If you can trick the user, you can usually bypass a lot of that control. It's something that can easily be automated, which we're about to talk about here in just a second, and how that can get even more dangerous. But it's like the path of least resistance when it comes to this. So yeah, stray away from the idea of like every attack is like, someone with 15 monitors on their screen and a bunch of typing. This is the most prevalent that we see.
That makes a lot of sense, and I think we'll come back to that idea of social engineering and how you can train up a workforce to at least be aware of what's out there and hopefully not be successfully hooked in a phishing attempt or speared in a spear phishing attempt. But we'll go ahead and move on here, and this is something that John has prepared. It's a look at a recent tool that if you've been clued into pretty much any tech news over the past few months, I feel like you would have heard the name ChatGPT. This is a look at how a ChatGPT user could potentially use the AI platform to create a phishing email that gets past a lot of simple awareness type sniff tests. So I'm going to let this play, and John, if you want to, speak to what's going on and what's happening here, I'll just let this play, and the attendees can, see what's going on in the ChatGPT window
For
itself.
sure. Yeah, for sure. So in regards to AI, it's ever evolving, which is changing the game for everyone. Whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, AI is a part of your life, kind of. So in regards to how good guys use AI to help them prevent malicious attackers from getting into specific networks or organizations. So typically, security operations centers can utilize AI to analyze large sets of data to find potential threats in real time. So that real time AI is so fast it just provides real time analysis of what's going on. Another piece that AI kind of comes into play is like it allows the good guys to see network traffic in an environment and identify anomalies to indicate whether there's a security breach or not. We're showing a video here of how bad guys use it, but I want to make sure it's clear that good guys use it as well. So in regards to the bad guys, ChatGPT is a tool that's out there where users can create malicious code with it to exploit new vulnerabilities or make it nice and easy and more sophisticated phishing emails, right? So this is an example of a specific user, ChatGPT user, creating a phishing email template that is going to come from HR. And if the user clicks on the link, they'll get a $50 Amazon gift card for completing the satisfaction survey. With that being said, it kind of goes, the thinking for this specific malicious attacker was kind of clued into like, hey, there was a recent company meeting that was going on. So their plan was to send this after that company meeting when the employees were going to start filling out their satisfaction survey, which normally comes at the end of the year. So as you can see here is that there's no grammar errors. It all makes sense. It's relatively tied to that specific organization. And so your common, phishing techniques of like, hey, the grammar's off, or this just doesn't make sense. This is not happening in real life. This is where it changes. AI is helping these malicious actors create those phishing emails so there's not grammar errors. It makes sense. It's happening within the organization, that kind of thing.
Right. So this example is concerning for many reasons, and honestly, just scary for everything that John has just said. But there's a couple of other issues with AI developing and evolving, and it's number one that it makes different types of attacks more accessible to lower skilled attackers. But also, like with regards to phishing, just in this example, one of the ways that we can help, try to determine a phishing scam is quite simply grammar, or, the way that sentences are structured. I mean, cyber attacks happen globally with, many different countries that speak different languages, and not all of them are going to be, they're not going to be, super fluent in English, for example. So, little things like the way that a sentence is structured or incorrect grammar can often be a flag for our end users that can, help determine whether or not an email is malicious. And just from this example alone, this email doesn't really read like there's anything odd about it. So, at first glance, from, we're in front of an end user that, doesn't get routine cybersecurity awareness and aware of what they need to look for, or anyone that's just in a rush could read this, and there is at least a little bit of credibility in the fact that it reads like it makes sense. So it just makes it harder for our end users.
It's a great point. I actually just saw something, I believe, over the weekend actually, that showed ChatGPT being used in marketing copywriting functions, where the user told ChatGPT to adopt a certain sort of tone or voice. For example, write this email as if you were an executive C-level person, and it does make changes to the structure, to the vocabulary it's using, things like that. It's an incredibly interesting tool. It's an incredibly powerful tool. I don't even begin to claim to, I guess, fully understand it. But I think the important takeaway is that it's it's important to realize that these tools are tools that are available to both sides of this. If you want to look at this as a good guys versus bad guys sort of thing, with the good guys being your Braxtons and your Johns, and the bad guys being who knows out there, right? Using these sorts of things. I think it's going to be interesting. I think we're still very early in all of this, and it's going to be interesting to see exactly how both sides of that develop. I don't think anybody can really speak to that fully at this point. At least certainly I can't. But it's interesting times ahead. I think that's the least you could say. And I think it is reassuring, though, to know that folks like John and Braxton are aware of this. They're actively, watching it. They're actively staying tuned and learning about it as this stuff develops quite literally around us. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to some ways that you can detect or prevent a phish in your network. Some of these are fairly tried and true. Like I've said before earlier in the presentation, phishing is not new whatsoever, but it keeps being used because, frankly, it works. Calling back to a few slides ago, John and his colleagues have seen 90% of the attacks that they investigate involve some form of human social interaction, probably, if I had to guess, typically through something like a phishing scam. So, what are some ways that you can detect and hopefully stay a bit safer from these sorts of things, John?
Yeah, so in regards to phishing, it's always really important to educate those users and have phishing be top of mind. So, if it looks like a phishing scam, it probably is, right? It's really important to, if you're seeing an email come in from a specific vendor, reach out directly to them in forms that you've talked to them before. Like if you had their phone number, just pick up the phone and dial their number and reach out to them and say, hey, did you actually send this email to me? Because if it looks like a phishing scam, it probably is. Now, in regards to links, lots of phishing scams include a link. There's a there's a way to look at that specific link without actually clicking on it. And typically, if you just hover over a hyperlink, it'll show you the link. So uh, usually, if that link, shows any different domains or different things within that specific link, if it looks suspicious, don't click on it. The third piece there is using a framework. So a framework is a structured set of guidelines or best practices for managing and protecting organization sensitive information and critical assets from cyber threats. So looking at a specific framework for your environment will help you prevent phishing from attacking your organization, but more importantly, it'll reduce your cyber risk there. And then looking at pop-ups, typically pop-ups are ads and they're not necessarily things that you should click on. So if pop-ups occur, just ignore them. If you're curious, just ignore them. So that's my recommendations there.
Yeah, and a couple things to kind of highlight here in this list is like, use a spam filtering solution. Like we talked about, employee training a little bit already, but there are also actual technical controls that we can implement, like a some sort of mail appliance to act as a gateway for you, that can actually, capture, potential spam emails or phishing emails. And the last point there, if it sounds too real or too good to be true, it probably is. Just calling back to that, like Amazon gift card that you got for free, like, if you signed up for like a contest or something, or if you should be expecting that. Like it's it's a company, it's a corporation, and they're not always going to just hand out free gift cards, right? So just a little bit of like stopping and thinking, and am I expecting this? Is this something that makes sense? Goes a long way. And then the third bullet there, when we're talking about a cybersecurity framework, you might be asking yourself, like, well, how does that directly detect or prevent a phishing email? It doesn't. It's indirectly helping you that way. So what a cybersecurity framework is going to help you is like talking about, again, cybersecurity awareness training, something like KnowBe4 to help harden your users against phishing scams and phishing emails, like using a technical control like a spam filter. A good cybersecurity framework, we use NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, as an example. They have many different frameworks regarding like technical controls and administrative controls and operational controls that you want to use. So that's just an example, but any of those frameworks is going to help you in hardening your organization and your end users in detecting and preventing a phishing scam, phishing email.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I know I just saw, I believe last week actually, I'm not for sure if this was the Braxton's team or not, doing this internally to NetGain. I saw an email from an internal IT person, fairly higher up, who asked for me to click a link to it was they claimed that there was an email backup happening, and to secure something, I had to click this link. My red flags immediately went up, and I'm not for sure if they're running something like that currently. We do internal testing like that, but we have a nice little add-in for Outlook where I can just click to report the fish, and or the attempted fish. Maybe it's a fish, and that's what I did. But I think that's what Braxton's getting at, having these sorts of awareness trainings for your staff can be immensely helpful. And even if I misinterpreted that and it was completely real, it's okay, right? That's going to get back to somebody like Braxton. And if I really did need to take an action there, it's going to be fine. You can never be too aware or too concerned. I don't want to use the word paranoid because I don't think that's right. I think it's just aware. And when we look back way at the beginning of this presentation, an attack happens every 11 seconds, right? I think being more cautious is by far the best bet rather than being less cautious. But let's go ahead and move on to the last major section of today's presentation and look at a few best practices to keep in mind when you are implementing a cybersecurity plan. These would be a part of, like Braxton and John spoke about, these industry standard frameworks. But let's see. All right. I'm sorry. Actually, we'll ask a question here really quick. Our third poll. Does your organization, be that your business that you're with, does your organization use a multi-layered cybersecurity defense strategy? So you should see that popping up on your screen now. And we'll get into exactly what a multi-layered cybersecurity defense strategy is here in just a moment. But essentially, do you think, or do you know if your organization is using more than just one technical control to to prevent some of this? Let this run for another few seconds here, give everybody a chance to vote. Looks like we've got most people in though already. 75% of you say yes, your organization does use multi-layered defense, and 20%, well, we're getting some more in here, but roughly 20% say I'm not sure, and roughly 5% say no, you do not use a multi-layered defense. So that's interesting. Um, Certainly, we'll look into why you should certainly be using that. But John, if you want to take some of this here and take a look at what a multi-layered defense strategy is and what some of those layers could be.
Yeah. So cybersecurity can be really difficult to navigate as there's tons of acronyms, there's tons of frameworks, there's tons of lots of different things pulling you from one direction to the next. We're going to provide some best practices here, but looking at acronyms. So on your left-hand side there, there's multi-factor authentication, which normally stands for MFA. That's going to be a tool that is put in place to ensure that two forms of authentication is being provided when trying to log into something. So being a security professional myself, I have MFA enabled for everything I log into. And there's a few reasons why, but it's mainly because it prevents unauthorized access to all my accounts, right? The next piece I want to talk about is that managed detection and response. So MDR is typically managed detection and response. So that's normally a service that provides 24/7 monitoring of your telemetry to make sure that things, when they happen in your environment, they don't go unresponded to. So nipping those events in the butt right away compared to letting it grow within your environment and making that situation get larger. That's the MDR, the managed detection response. The next piece would be like network segmentation. So that's like dividing large networks into smaller ones to reduce that cyber risk by allowing you to better control what's happening within each network. I like to always say it's like creating different rooms within the house for different purposes. So, if you have thermostats on one network and your servers on a separate, you're keeping a wall in between those two so they're not talking to each other. And then, of course, that backup strategy, ensuring that they're held off site. So if an attack were to occur, it's not going to affect your backups. So looking at disaster recovery and coming back online faster when those backups are in a separate location, you don't have to worry about them getting locked up and being completely out of luck there. So with that being said, Braxton, I'll give it to you to take off the rest.
Sure, thanks. And kind of the bottom half of this slide here, there's already been a couple of things. Well, most of these things we've already kind of addressed and touched on a little bit. And the first one is employee training. We've talked about phishing emails. That's one of the biggest attack vectors that we're going to see. The biggest vehicles for these types of attacks that we've addressed and these rising trends. Getting your employees trained on cybersecurity awareness and what to look for is one of the best ways to help kind of reduce and limit the risk for your organization and its data. Vulnerability scanning and patching, again, to kind of call back to the earlier slides there, 80% of the incidents we see are directly related to misconfigured devices or just missing patches or insufficient patching. So, getting a vulnerability management program set up for your organization, again, is one of the best ways that we can tackle that. And then incident response and disaster recovery plans. So no tool in cybersecurity to protect you is 100% guaranteed. If there was, John and I wouldn't be here. So you really need to treat attacks and cybersecurity incidents as a when and not an if type of situation. What do we do when we get hit with, say, ransomware? What do we do when we, get hit with a funds transfer fraud and we accidentally send $3 billion to, some offshore account somewhere? What do we do in that scenario? So having an incident response plan that's tested, that has a team that's defined, that is that fits the needs of the business is going to be important. And then also a disaster recovery plan and a disaster recovery system. So, in the event we are in a situation where, production machines are down or, all productivity has ceased, what is our plan for that? How do we get back online? Do we have, some sort of, I don't want to call it a quick fix, but some sort of, fix that's out there that we can, quickly stand ourselves back up so that we don't just hemorrhage money due to not being productive. And then the last one here is privacy policy, but I actually want to just expand that to having a cybersecurity program in general. And one of the best ways to kind of, get your first step forward in that is to actually have a risk assessment performed. A risk assessment is going to assess your security controls based off of the cybersecurity framework. We talked about NIST, that's National Institute of Standards Technology again. So one of those frameworks there, that's going to, assess your gaps. What controls do we have? What are we missing? And then of the controls that we do have, how mature are they? So that's going to help you, put your best foot forward in terms of where do we need to go for our cybersecurity program and our risk management process, and what are the next steps in terms of for us getting there. So I'll be honest with you, each of these bullet points that are here on this slide, we could have a separate webinar on each one, and this is not all inclusive of what is typically talked about when we discuss like defense in depth in a multi-layered approach. But this is just a good example on, what are some tools that are out there if we want to get our, if we want to start moving in that direction, what's something that we could look at. So I will step off my soapbox here and allow myself a chance to breathe.
No problem at all. Thank you, Braxton and John. Yeah, it's Braxton said this a while ago toward the beginning of the webinar about how you can think of cybersecurity defense as locks on your door, and obviously having 27 locks is a whole lot better than just having one, which is, and it's certainly a lot better than having none. Multi-layered is certainly the way to go because, as Braxton and John said, none of these are foolproof. There are ways around or through each of these, and even ones that aren't listed here. But the more you stack up, the more defensible your position is, your posture is, as cybersecurity folks like to call it. But that wraps us up for our main presentation content today. I do want to take a little bit of time for a Q&A session. We have a couple that have come in already throughout the webinar, but if you do have a question, you can find your questions drop-down menu that's on the kind of long GoToWebinar panel. You should see that. There's a little chat box there where you can type in your question, and I'll be able to see that. We can ask John and Braxton here to weigh in on anything that you might have. But I'm gonna go ahead and throw one out there to you all. John or Braxton, if you want to speak to this, feel free. But let's see, how often should you perform a vulnerability scan? And when it's being performed, do my computers shut down?
I'll take that one, Chris. So we recommend that at a minimum, you should have vulnerability scanning performed on a quarterly basis. The real answer is that, the more routine and the more common you can make it, the better. Because again, it all works towards, reducing the risk on your assets and your endpoints and infrastructure in your business. So, if we're talking about like a quarterly schedule, there could be like a month or two where something is vulnerable and you won't be aware until your next scanning point. But at a minimum, that's what we recommend. And the second part of that question was, do we need to worry about like computers shutting down? Like, how invasive is this? So I just want to make a quick separation on what we're talking about here. There's a difference between vulnerability scanning and a vulnerability assessment and a penetration test. Now, a penetration test is typically what you need to worry about with machines and things shutting down. It's typically more invasive. It's someone actually trying to go in and exploit devices and actually execute an attack. Vulnerability scans are less invasive. It's more so of defining what operating systems are out there, what ports are open. Here's what you could be vulnerable to, as opposed to here's what we were definitely able to exploit in a penetration test. Now, that being said, there's always a risk when it comes to vulnerability scanning, just based off of how the scan operates. Some devices may not like it, but in terms of how invasive and I'll say resource intensive it is for endpoints, it's not really that much of an issue compared to an actual penetration test.
Thank you, Braxton. And the other one that we've had come in so far, there is still time to ask a question if you would like. But the other one we've had come in is, I've heard a little bit about cybersecurity insurance. We don't have it, but do we need it? And how can I determine if we need it?
So really, again, it kind of boils down to it depends. I would say that you definitely need to look into your options when it comes to cybersecurity insurance. The reason why it depends is because, number one, your type of coverage could vary, based off of, if you suffer a ransomware attack, your cybersecurity coverage may, number one, be disqualified based off of, what devices you have in your environment. If they're not patched, if they're out of support, you could be disqualified for that. They may not even, the type of coverage they provide you, it may not, they may not assist you with like financial services if you have to pay for like a third party to come in and help recover you and restore you. And if you are in a situation, again, this is just with ransomware, but if you are in a situation where you do have to pay, which we don't recommend, by the way, but if you feel that you are in that situation, they also may have like a negotiator for you that you can work with. So just like probably with, like car insurance, you need to have it. It's better to have it, than not. But please do not consider cybersecurity insurance as your disaster recovery plan. That is not your business continuity plan. That is not your be all end all. We're good if we ever get hit with an attack. That is not, I promise you, that is probably not going to work out in your favor, because if you're relying on that, they're going to check you. They're going to check your environment out. They're going to see, what controls you had in place. Are you exercising your due diligence, your due care in protecting your data and your customers' data. And if they see that you're not, well, they're just not going to help you. So just be careful, is all I'll say, and make sure regards to cybersecurity insurance, if you're making the decision on that, just make sure that it makes sense to your business. That's all.
Thanks, Braxton. We do have another question that came in here just a minute ago, so I want to make sure we have some time to address this one. So let's see. This question says, our IT people have a red warning on outside email that says, be careful. Are scammers able to get around this to make emails appear like they are internal? And I assume what this person means there is, I think probably a lot of our organizations have that where, EXT for external or something like that is appended onto an email subject in your inbox. Is there a way that scammers can get around that? I'm going to add on to this question just a little bit. How easy is that if they can?
Okay, so if they are, the way that they would have to get around that is if an account gets compromised. And so they get the username and they're able to also get the password. Maybe you're not protected by multi-factor authentication and they are quite literally able to log in to that person's account. Once they're in that person's account, any email they send is technically from within the organization. So if the account's compromised, even though it's their account, it's not the person behind the keyboard anymore, right? So if they pose like a funds transfer fraud type email, if they request like a wire transfer or something, you're not going to get that warning about the email coming from outside the organization because it's technically not. Now, if no account is compromised and this same attacker creates, they can spoof their email address to look like this person's that's inside your company. But if you look at like the email address that's coming from, it's obviously vastly different. They can change the name to make it look like that. And if you're busy, you won't catch it. And they'll have the email signature look right, all of that. But because it's not from that person's account, if you have like that external email flag warning, it's still going to have that external flag at the top, that banner. So the way that they would get around that is, again, if that person's account is actually compromised. Or you just don't have that rule that shows you.
Right. Not every organization does. I mean, I would say to the person who asked this question, it seems like your organization is at least thinking about things, right? But by just having that control, and that is certainly not something that we always see. Well, I shouldn't say we, that Braxton and John always see. So that's at least in my mind a good sign that you're doing something right. But as we, going back to that multi-layered defense, something like that is certainly not your only defense. But that ends us for questions, and I do want to be respectful of everybody's time here and actually close out at 2. But I wanted to give John and Braxton just a few moments or any sort of closing remarks. John, do you want to say anything about Arctic Wolf? Just a little bit about maybe what you all do, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Chris. So in regards to Arctic Wolf, we're a MDR, so managed SIM. We also do incident response, and we look at vulnerabilities. So we have a managed risk side of things too. But if you have any questions or want help navigating through the confusion of cybersecurity, Arctic Wolf is here with NetGain, and we'll be happy to walk you through your security journey and what cybersecurity can look like for your organization.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we work together quite closely on cybersecurity offerings, and I'll be open with you. There will be a question at the end of this webinar asking you if you would like to get in contact with us. We would be happy to talk to you more about cybersecurity. Maybe somebody like Braxton could help figure out if you really are using a multi-layered defense strategy, and if you're not, how you could put one in place to become more secure. But I think that's going to do us for today. I want to sincerely thank everybody for coming out, and I hope this was helpful. You will be getting a follow-up with the recording of this as well as that quick question. So thank you all, and I hope you have a great Tuesday. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.